Good morning. Welcome to our presentation today. Our presentation is called Waded Through WIDA and Now What? Steps to Take After Identifying English Learners. My name is Katie LaShawn and I'm here with my colleague Claire Roach.
Good morning, everybody.
We're calling in from the University of Notre Dame and our English as a New Language program. We are completely dedicated to this work of serving your culturally and linguistically diverse children in Catholic schools. And so we're here to support you. We'd love to begin with a prayer. And there's a piece of art here from our favorite artist, Brother Mickey McGrath. Check him out if you're not already familiar. But I'm happy to begin us in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, thank you for the opportunity to encounter you and others. Animate my work that I may embrace my students and families who so beautifully reflect the diverse and universal church. Inspire my efforts to educate the whole child, celebrating the cultures and languages that enrich our school. Bless my efforts to empower children and families to recognize and employ their own unique gifts and talents to renew our community in your image. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. These ideas of embracing, educating, and empowering really center us here in our work. So we'll just introduce this to you a little bit. We believe in embracing the future of the Catholic Church through an increase in Latino enrollment. So if you have any desire to learn more about how to do this or what this looks like, please reach out to us. We believe in educating culturally and linguistically diverse children through excellent academic formation. And in this, we are available and ready to deliver professional development to your teachers and to your school, and to talk about really embedding teacher leaders in this field of English as a new language or English as a second language. We also believe in empowering all Catholic school stakeholders through the celebration of faith and language and culture. And so we really just want to ground ourselves today in this idea of what is WIDA, what are these scores showing us, and what does it mean for our classroom? And we really want to give a shout out here to one of our Catholic schools here in South Bend, St. Adalbert's, because they posed this question to us beginning in the fall and just really got our wheels turning about how to unpack this data and what does it mean at the teacher level and certainly at the student level. And so thank you, St. Adalbert's, for your really good question and inquiring about this. We believe deeply in three areas here. We believe that in order to best serve English learners in Catholic schools, our schools need to be really good at three things: cultivating culturally sustaining classrooms, understanding the process of second language acquisition, and employing research-based instructional strategies. So today our presentation, as we unpack these WIDA scores, we're really going to spotlight these bottom two, of the process of second language acquisition and employing research-based instructional strategies. But check back with us at any time if you want to learn more about understanding the culture of your culturally and linguistically diverse children. We're happy to talk about what we've learned from your beautiful schools. The way we're going to do this today is we're going to take a closer look at these WIDA scores, and we're going to provide you a three-step plan to move the needle. So number one, we want to answer the question, what does data tell me? What does this data tell me? So we're going to unpack that WIDA report. So how do we begin to discuss this at the PLC level? So how do we begin to identify priorities? And how does this look in the classroom, making instructional changes? So we're going to walk through these three steps together today. What we also want to do in terms of just good teaching, we provided a graphic organizer for you to be able to follow along. So here's how we get there. I would like for you to go to ace.nd for Notre Dame.edu/ENL. So that's ace.nd.edu/ENL. And I want you to go there right now because I want to show you on our English as a New Language, this is our website. There's a resource tab. So here are some other things. This is our Hernandez Fellows program, our professional development opportunities, our work in dual language schools, and then there's a tab for resources. And there are a ton, and Claire will talk about this later, a ton of incredible free resources for your Catholic schools designed from your questions. And so what we'd love for you to do is we have a section called NCEA Graphic Organizer. So go ahead and go there, and then you can download this graphic organizer. And the graphic organizer has little sections for you, like a good graphic organizer, definitely designated sections for you to follow along with our conversation today. So we'll give you just a second to download that graphic organizer. While you're downloading that graphic organizer, we'd like to start with an image and several questions. So the image is this. The image is of a file folder in the office, maybe even on the cloud these days, and how we begin to take in this WIDA data that's often stored in one of these places, and how do we move it into the hands of teachers, and ultimately, how does this impact student learning? So I have 3 questions for you. So currently, where and how is your WIDA data stored? Who currently combs this data and looks it over, and who is responsible for tracking progress? We will just say in a good number of our Catholic schools, we're finding that this data is in the cloud. It doesn't necessarily get distributed in our teachers' mailboxes and in their hands. And then ultimately, our teachers are not necessarily feeling the responsibility for knowing this data, and then ultimately for moving the students along this continuum. And then number 3, what are the goals of the WIDA assessment for your school? How is your school using this assessment tool? WIDA itself identifies 4 uses. So were you using it to identify who is an English learner and who is not? Are you using it for placement in terms of really digging into these 5 levels? Where are they at? Are you using it for progress, which is more of a formative assessment? And we'll certainly advocate for that. And are you using it for achievement, to be able to say, yes, this child has achieved grade level proficiency in these 4 language domains? So take just a second and think about where you are. And there's no right or wrong. We want to move everyone toward achievement. But how are you currently using this assessment in your school? Thank you very much. We're going to revisit this slide at the very end of the presentation, and just hope that maybe you have some different ideas of how to answer this. All right, Ms. Claire, where do we go from here?
So just to reiterate a very important point that Katie underscored, what we hope to give you today is a very workable path to follow, to take something that's honestly can be very overwhelming and actually bring it down into the level of the classroom in a way that's meaningful and makes a difference. So the first thing that we're going to engage with today is really helping us to understand, what do these WIDA reports actually mean? Okay, what are the key elements that we should be looking for within the WIDA report? How do we make sense of it? Understanding how this impacts or colors the way we look at student performance of English learners in our classrooms. And then how do we take all that data and distill it into some really important points that we should think about and ultimately discuss within our teams of educators. So let's go to the next slide, Katie, and just kind of from a 3,000-degree angle, take a look at what the most important parts are of those WIDA score reports. So ultimately, a WIDA access score is going to give you a sense of the progress on their English language development of your English learners, okay? And there are 2 really key elements that we want you to understand within this score report, because it can be overwhelming, honestly, when you look at it. And remember, too, that we developed this pathway because we heard schools saying we need help making this manageable. So 2 key points here to understand deeply about this report. 1 is it's organized by the 4 domains of language, right? What does it mean to be proficient in English? Well, it doesn't just mean that you can write or read in English. It means that you can also listen and speak. And all of these 4 domains interact with one another. Generally, our students are assessed on our state test on the reading and the writing. But of course, all of that oral language plays a huge part and how they ultimately deepen and expand their English skills. In addition to those 4 sections, you will find a score, the numbers 1 through 6, that reflect the proficiency level of your students. Okay, and so that's the score that you want to look for within each of these domains, the proficiency level of the student. 1 being a very beginning, emergent, entering English learner, and 6 being totally ready for the full academic challenge of the classroom in English. So we're going to take a quick deep dive into both of these to help you understand it a little bit better, and then we'll begin to unpack. Katie, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Absolutely. So Claire brought up a great point. So WIDA gives you data relative to these 4 domains. The biggest takeaway we want you to understand about these 4 domains is that they're not equal, and that students can possess different proficiency levels within each. So there's 2 ways to kind of think about this and slice this. The first one is the fact that some language is what we call receptive, and some language is what we call productive. So receptive language is language that you largely, which makes sense, that you take in. So when you're listening, you're absorbing language, and when you're reading, you're absorbing language. Versus speaking and writing require you to produce language. And generally, receptive language, we don't tend to say easier, but it's almost like
comes first.
It does come first, generally speaking. Absolutely. Thanks, Claire. And that we acknowledge that speaking and writing is often more difficult. So that's one way to slice it. Another way to think about is think about your own foreign language learning experiences or your second language experiences. Generally speaking, we understand what is being said to us in another language. Then we're able to potentially respond with productive language within speaking. And then comes reading, and then comes writing. And why this matters is reading and writing, especially in content areas, requires a heavy lift of vocabulary, context, understanding, kind of deep content. And the reason that writing is the most difficult, if you think about it, writing is, you can't correct in the moment. Writing, well, you can, that's a whole nother conversation, but writing involves verb tense and spelling and phonics and punctuation. And so why we say this is, number one, in most of our classrooms, our children do a lot of listening and speaking, which is wonderful. And we need to have grade level proficiency in those areas. But often our assessments are them reading and writing independently. So why this matters, again, is because a lot of times as an educator, I can observe during a lesson that my student is understanding the content because I'm speaking, they're responding. But when they go to read and write and complete whatever my assessment is for this particular lesson, I might see a discrepancy between what they were able to show me they know in these 2 different settings. And that's because these 4 domains, we can possess different proficiency levels in each of the 4 domains. That is why WIDA gives you a score in all 4 of these. And as we begin to unpack with sample reports, you'll see that generally speaking, our students are higher in listening than they are in writing. And so we wanted to give you that frame. Claire, anything else to add there?
No, just that these 4 domains are incredibly interconnected in any given classroom. So, some of the practices we see is that when teachers are really intentional about building vocabulary orally first, and then begin to take it to the written level, that is one of the more effective ways to actually help students acquire vocabulary. So even though they're sort of distinguished on the score report, all 4 of these domains play a critical role in helping students to acquire English.
And I think that's a perfect bridge, Claire, to this idea. And that's when we are lesson planning for our English learners, we have to intentionally keep the 4 domains in mind. Our lesson plans have to address them, but they also have to account for these different language proficiency levels. So we've talked about, even within these 4 domains, our students can be one of the 5 levels or 6 levels identified by WIDA. What we want to show you here is that this idea of language proficiency levels and the general acquisition of a second language is not unique to WIDA. Generally speaking, this is what we know in the field. So we've kind of superimposed WIDA's levels with the framework that we like as well. So this framework that we often refer to is based on Krashen and Terrell, and they put them into 5 buckets. Different language assessments use different buckets. At the end of the day, it's still the same general spectrum. So I'm just going to walk you through these for frame of reference. So you can see these 5 levels. You can see the amount of time there. And then you can see, and this builds off WIDA's idea of the CanDo Indicators. So the underlying goal here is to understand that this is a process. And while your students may not be able to complete your 2-paragraph writing assignment that you're asking to show content knowledge, there are things that your English learners can do along the way. They are not devoid of content knowledge. There are things that they can do to show you content knowledge. It's just that they're a little limited at times by their English proficiency. But number 1, we're going to bolster their English proficiency along the way. And number 2, we're going to find all the ways that we can for them to show us our content knowledge. What can they do? So very quickly, the silent period, 0 to 6 months, they know 1 to 500 words. It is very normal in this stage for a child to not speak, to simply take in language, not produce language. And that's okay. We need to recognize this. What can this child do? This child can point, they can act out, they can match, they can label, they can show you something, they can circle something. We need to we need to plan our lessons around these proficiency levels. We need to ensure that this child has the time and the ability to show us what they can do. One big kind of myth here is that the silent period only happens when children are little. You may have a student come in 8th grade in the silent period as well, right? So just something to think about to begin to recognize these. Early productions, 6 months to a year, about 1,000 words. These students can have 1 or 2 word responses and short phrases. You can see some examples below. Speech emergence, 1 to 3 years, 3,000 words. These students can write simple sentences. They can explain why and how. Intermediate fluency, 3 to 5 years, 6,000 words, complex sentences, can speak at length, but there are still a few errors. And then advanced fluency, 7 to 10 years, content, academic vocabulary they're acquiring, near native fluency. The other thing I want to identify here is that a lot of our students get to this intermediate fluency or this level 4, level 5 in WIDA, and this is where they tend to get stuck. They get stuck for a couple reasons. They get stuck because at this point, generally speaking, in terms of age, they get older in school and our content areas become very siloed, right? So I teach math and that's what I need to do. And I teach science, and we stop thinking a little bit about being language teachers. And the other part of this is it just becomes more complex. Content gets deeper, reading gets more complex, the writing.
I want to add something, Katie, to that too. I think they can become hidden, meaning their oral language is so proficient. They've been in our schools long enough. They're doing so well just within the classroom that we forget that they're still English learners, right? That all that academic vocabulary and complex grammar is still a challenge to them, something they're still working to acquire. And so if we forget that we're language teachers, if we become a little less intentional about really building language every day in our classrooms, regardless of what our subject area is, that explains why oftentimes the students get here, and as Katie mentioned, get stuck. They don't seem to be progressing as quickly. And so that's just a cautionary tale for all of us, that we double down in these stages on teaching language. We don't ease up.
110%. I couldn't have said it better, Claire. Thank you. So let me recap for just a second as we transition. The reason we've talked about today, we're starting to bridge to how to unpack these reports. What we want to show you is that these reports, and Claire's going to highlight this, talk about these 4 domains, and they give you a score relative to these language proficiency levels. So we just thought that context absolutely mattered.
So here's your first interactive challenge. We want you to do a quick scavenger hunt. This is a real student roster report from last year from a school. So what you're looking at is more or less the type of report that you should be seeing or look for specifically from WIDA, the student roster report for a single classroom. First challenge, find the 4 language domains on this report? Do you see listening, speaking, reading, and writing? Excellent. Okay, now you're going to find that there are more columns to the right. I don't want to say ignore them altogether, but for the purposes of finding a clear, workable pathway through WIDA, we're going to focus primarily on those 4 domains. The ones to the right are sort of the amalgam of how those domains interact with one another. Okay, your second challenge. Find the proficiency scores. Those scores on 1 to 6 within each of those domains. Okay, Katie, I can't move my mouse in this presentation since you've got the screen, but I think at this point, folks, you've figured out now what those key numbers we're looking for and what that number means with respect to each of the 4 domains of language. So this is your first real to-do list as a school leader working to make these WIDA reports meaningful. To find the student roster report for each of your classrooms. Okay, print it out on paper. Katie and I joke, we're a little bit old school, but we actually think it's effective, which is why we're suggesting you do it now. It's something that your teachers can do to really engage deeply with the report. So what we recommend is that you get out a bunch of colored pencils, print these out, work with teachers. We're beginning to segue a little bit into what we do in our PLCs. And to actually color code yourself with those colored pencils, the score report. Okay, now you can always do this in Excel. You can download these scores. You can shade it on the computer. But there's something about actually taking the color that forces you to really look closely at each child and what that number is telling you. So these colors are pretty consistent across WIDA reporting. We highlighted in green. Actually, notice there is no green on this report because the green and the blue levels tend to be really for newcomer students. So these are generally students that we might encounter at the pre-K or kindergarten level that are just entering our schools, that might be speaking Spanish or Tagalog or Creole around their kitchen table. It might also be a student that's just entered our school that's a newcomer to the United States. But most of our students encounter our school in pre-K and kindergarten and very quickly, because their brains are sponges, begin to progress and move into the developing, expanding, and bridging stages, which you see exemplified in this 4th grade report. So we just went in and we invited our teachers to find everyone, all the scores that were 3, 4, and 5. If somebody scored a 6, we didn't color it because that means the student is doing wonderfully in that language domain. So if you look at some of these patterns, what do you start to notice? That the students in this 4th grade are really successful at listening in English, all taking in the English, understanding, creating meaning from what they're hearing. The speaking and the writing, right, the productive section is proving to be a little bit more of a challenge. So your first step is to get out your crayons or your colored pencils and actually begin to shade in this WIDA report. And you can on each one of their classes individually. Okay.
Claire, we lost you there for just a second. So would
Katie,
you
any questions? Anything I can clarify?
Yeah, Claire, we lost you there for just a second.
Sorry.
Will you repeat your last statement? You were just saying, I would assume something about doing this for each of your classes.
Yeah, this is a great way to take this report, put it into the hands of your teachers, give them something very specific to do that actually causes them to really stop, process, and then think about where their students are and which domains really deserve some attention.
And this is back to our original image. This is a very concrete way to move things out of the cloud and out of a file folder into the hands of our teachers.
And it can be an opportunity for you as a school leader to just remind your teachers the 2 key ideas we're looking for on the report, right? That language expresses itself in different ways, needs to be taught in different ways, but also that students don't learn English in 6 months. If you look back at that spectrum, you're talking about a 5 to 7 year continuum about promoting, not just in those first years, but as the students grow too. So Katie, let's take a look now at how we can deepen this discussion and really help students engage with this data in a small group or a PLC format.
Absolutely. So on your graphic organizer, why don't you take just a few seconds to think about what does this data tell you and how you're going to unpack this report, and then we're going to bridge to PLCs. Okay, Claire, now I have this data in my hand and I've color coded it. What do we do? What do we do as a school to move this along? And Claire, está congelado. That means you're frozen, Claire. Well, we're going to get Claire back online, and I'm happy to go ahead and tackle part of this for us. So how do we begin to discuss this and move this data into these small learning communities? So we want to begin sorting our students by our proficiency levels. We want to review these can-do bands as a team. We want to set priorities because we believe we're better and we were made for each other. We believe in connecting with each other. I also believe that you've seen that this is a spectrum. So if I'm the second grade teacher, it's very helpful for me to work above and below me to talk about where students are and how we can work together. So we come at this in a couple ways. The first one is, how do you take this student roster report that you've color coded, how do you move it into your own working document? So in the graphic organizer that we provided, I provided you an example of a table just made in Word. You can also use Google Sheets, Excel, however you transfer this to a table. So we're going to talk about what's actually on these tables. So the first thing is, I've created a table for each of the 4 domains. So listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And I've identified the language proficiency level. So who is emerging, who is entering, emerging, developing, and use your own color coding system, certainly. But then what I've done is I've actually started to put student names in there. So you can see Marie, Addie, Mary, Mark, Helen, these are all the names of the children on our team. And then the CanDo indicators. What are you able to see? What are they able to do? We'll talk about where to get these CanDo indicators. But I also think it's really important that your teachers begin to understand and make note of what can they do? What am I seeing that they're doing well relative to their language proficiency level and in which domain? And then finally, what supports? What are we putting in place? What have we tried? And this, I think, is a really good space for conversation. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a second, and I want you to look at what do you notice about transferring this data from the WIDA report and making these charts yourself? What do you like? What would you consider changing? So we'll pause as Claire joins us again. We'll pause here for just a moment. Hi, Claire, welcome back. Welcome to 2021. Continued. You're good. So Claire, you're great. We just walked through talking about transferring data from those from the WIDA report to the tables. And then Claire, I was just bridging to review these CanDo indicators. Would you like to jump in here?
I sort of love this slide, Katie, because I really feel like this is authentically Catholic work, right? I refer to taking a pause and really looking carefully and reminding ourselves what our students can do is like a sacramental moment, right? And this is so important, sacramental moment, friends, where we stop, we pay attention, and we take a moment to really accept the gifts that these students have and the gifts that they are to us. And we want to very carefully avoid here the deficit mentality trap, because I've seen this again and again when we work with teachers. I mean, the job of a teacher is very complex, especially in these last couple of years with accountability. And so it can be really stressful to take a look at students that aren't yet where we want them to be with respect to academic achievement or language achievement. And so it can be very easy for teachers to slide into, these kids can't, they don't do this because at home they don't do this, or they don't have anybody to teach them this. And I hear it again and again. And it is not, I don't think it comes from a bad place. I think actually it reflects just how challenging the job of an educator is. And so to really pause and think and remember that they're doing it very often in two languages, right? And it can remind us of the types of techniques we can use in our class that will make a difference, and to beat back the they can't, it's the fault of fill in the blank. So this moment of reviewing the can do statements is actually really critical work. So let's take a look at some of those can do statements, Katie.
Oh. And the power is out at the University of Notre Dame.
This is the,
I'm sitting in the dark. I'm going to turn on my phone flashlight and pray that we have internet, Claire, because we're recording this on my computer.
I think everyone that's watching this presentation, Katie, is laughing because anybody that's tried to keep a school open this year has faced this in one form or another. So let's keep going. We got this. This little light of mine is what I'm thinking as you turn on your flashlight.
And on this point of
we'll think about what we can do even in the darkness.
100%. On these can do indicators, I want to say one thing, Claire. Go ahead. Can you hear me, Claire? I want to say on these can do indicators, just a reminder of what a superpower your children.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I appreciate most about WIDA.
All righty, we're here with these can do descriptors.
And I'm actually going to invite everybody to just quietly read them for a moment. And what I'm going to invite you to think about, Katie, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead, Claire.
Great.
I'm sorry, Claire. No, you were breaking up.
Okay. And we're going to keep going because the story I want to tell you.
Claire, we're only getting about every other word from you.
Katie, hit pause.
I will hit pause. Happy to. Hi, friends. Welcome back. We know this has been your own reality for many months now, but we have a bad storm here. And so I have power back on campus. I think, Claire, you guys are doing all right over there. We're happy to resume. So where we left off was just having you take a closer look at these can-do indicators yourself. We'll go ahead and give you that processing time right now. So just take a moment to look at these things that your students can do at each of these levels.
And I want to tell you just a brief story to drive home why it's so important to visit these can-do indicators. A story of a little guy that had just arrived to the United States. He was entering a second grade classroom, and the teacher said, "He can't do anything. What am I supposed to do with this child? He just sits there. He's completely lost." And we started by remembering that his little brain, who was doing amazing things, was going to begin with all of that receptive language. So the teacher started to experiment with very small tasks. Little guy, my friend, take this marker and put it at the board. And he would take the marker and he would go to the board. My friend, turn off the lights. And he would begin to go and turn off the lights. which just goes to show that there are things that he can do and is doing. He's working on beginning to understand. And that if we teachers understand what types of tasks we can really focus on within these different proficiency levels, that our students can show us how much English they are acquiring at any point. So it is important that our teachers take a minute to really think about the types of activities that they can engage their students in order that their students can show what it is that they're learning in class.
100%. And the only thing I'd like to add, two things here. Number one, and I think we started to talk about this before the power went out, but these students have a superpower. Our teachers need to recognize that, and our own students need to feel that way. Because if you think from their perspective, what does it feel like to hear things like he can't, or he has no language, or to feel that way themselves? So to build them up in their own capacity to think about what it is they can do, what it is they're able to do.
Right. Or one of my favorite, Katie, sorry for interrupting, is he doesn't have the vocabulary. When actually you compare that child's vocabulary to the kid sitting next to him who only speaks English, that child's vocabulary is actually, he probably knows more words than the child sitting next to him. It's just that he only knows some of them in English yet.
And that was Claire, absolutely brilliant. That was my second point, was just thinking about how truly difficult it is to acquire two languages, and to know that our children in a beautiful way, or in a simplified way, are acquiring double the language of a child that's just monolingual. And so it is, their brains are doing a lot, and there's a lot they can do. So thank you for digging deep into this, and to recognizing this, and to begin your plan your lessons around what it is your students can do. Let's take a closer look at what this might look like on your working document.
So, obviously it's easy to cut and paste, but sometimes a really nice challenge for teachers is take a look at those CanDo indicators. Think about the students in your classroom. What have you seen them do because they're capable of it? What are some maybe that you haven't seen them do because we haven't asked? Take those and throw them into your working document. So get out a pen, write them in, cut and paste if you're doing it digitally. And that's a teacher really indicating to you that he or she is thinking deeply about the nature of what we're asking our students to do in our classrooms, and begin to think about how techniques can make a difference.
So we've talked about unpacking these WIDA scores. We've talked about color coding them, moving them to this PLC level. So having these kind of grade level band conversations, planning up, planning down. We talked about that. So the question is, once you've started to sort in our charts, where do you go next? Where do you start? We'll talk about later, where do you want to end up, but where do you start? And here's just two ways to approach it with these guiding questions. Number one, at what level do the majority of your students fall? So this is one way to look at it if you approach it from the level. So maybe I have a large group of 1 and 2 of the students in the first and second level, or the third and fourth level. So we can really target level proficiency. Or is another guiding question, is one domain weaker or stronger than others? So maybe it's as a grade level band, Claire, we want to focus on building listening skills for the next 4 to 5, 6 weeks, right? So beginning to set your priorities. This is where we started with these PLCs, unpacking the data and narrowing, and knowing that this is a process. Go ahead, Claire.
You can't do it all at once. Those score reports are telling you a lot in one glance. You really have to look for patterns and ultimately decide, what do we want to tackle first?
100%.
And that's a decision your PLC team should be making together.
Absolutely. So here's where we've been. We've talked about how to unpack the report and how to identify priorities. Now, what does this look like at the classroom level? How do you make instructional change? So how do you move this to the every teacher level?
So we understand the report and what it's saying to us. We've started to categorize our students, and some patterns have begun to appear. We've made some decisions about what we think is most important or where we should start. Now what? What do we actually do? Okay, so this last part of our presentation is really thinking about what kinds of instructional techniques we can add to our tool belt, how we change up what's going on in the classroom to really respond well and strategically to these priorities. So the first thing that we're going to visit is just how to think strategically about it. Katie, can you go back one slide?
Yes, absolutely.
How to think about strategic implementation. The second one is how to actually identify those techniques to try. And the third point is just how do we create accountability so that we all actually get it done?
100%. I was so anxious to get to these systematic interventions, Claire. How do you propose that we do this? How do we identify these techniques, and what does this look like for us?
So the first approach I would argue is to think about what we can all be doing together, okay? And I love it because what I find is that when teachers decide that they're going to do something together, they're much more likely to hold each other in really gentle and fun ways accountable for doing it. It also allows teachers to observe each other. Come see what I just tried. Or you can even create a system in which, you have planned a visit, a quick visit where they can go see a counter teacher, a partner teacher implementing a technique. Also for building leaders, it means that I can go do a quick observation and just focus on one thing instead of a protocol that's got, 47 different parts. I'm going to come in and I'm going to be looking for whether or not you are using total physical response. You have, you're starting all your lessons with a quick vocabulary spotlight, right? Many of these different techniques. And then finally, you can ultimately look together to see if it's making a difference, right? It's a good way to really follow up and decide, okay, are we seeing progress? Should we keep this up? Do we need to tweak? Do we need to try something different? So we're all doing it together, sort of the systematic intervention. As a school leader, that's my favorite. But sometimes it can also be very effective to really have any kind of professional development arise from the individual needs and sort of insights of the individual teacher. And if you want to take that route, you can also, invite every teacher to explore one technique on their own. Go find a technique that you think will respond to this challenge. Research it. You try it out, and at the next PLC, come back and share it with everybody else. And that's a way to just sort of augment the number of techniques that are being shared within a teacher too. So within the teacher pool. So these are two sort of strategic ways you can think about integrating actual classroom changes into the PLC level. And we just, obviously there are thousands upon thousands of techniques out there. It's sort of an overload. So we wanted to direct you to 3 very specific places that you can go to find some really good techniques laid out before you. Katie, do you want to elaborate?
Sure. So the first one is our ENL 2-minute tips. So I'll give you an overview and then we'll visit all 3 of these very quickly. So our ENL 2-minute tips, number 2 is Coloring Colorado, and then WIDA Essential Actions Handbook. And we'll kind of walk you through because there's a lot in there. So our ENL 2-minute tips, I'm going to get these pulled up. Let's see. Claire, why don't you?
While you're pulling them up, let me describe what a 2-minute tip is. So, we wanted to create something that can be used effectively in a faculty meeting, for example, that a busy teacher can watch quickly. So these 2-minute tips are videos that spotlight a single practice that we think might be helpful for a teacher of English learners to utilize. Between us, they're not always exactly 2 minutes. Sometimes they're 3, 4, or 5, but the point is that they're very short and they're totally free. So this is a great way if you want to look through some of these, if you find something that you think addresses one of your priorities, that you all watch it together and then try it out in your classrooms.
100%. The other thing I would add is, and we said this before, that we are here to support you in this work. And so also on our resources website, there's a lot of information about e-learning. We have a language assessment, podcast, articles. There's a whole lot of things designed with you in mind. So visit us, and you can even sign up to get a little monthly email from us. The second place we want to visit is Colorín, Colorado. And this is a website. This is a federally funded website. So it's wonderful for teachers. It's also really good for parents. There's also a button here to have this show up in Spanish. And so there's just a lot of great things. One thing that, well, Claire, what is your favorite thing? And
one of my favorite things is they really promote reading at home. They have a bunch of things that you can send home to families, and they've translated it into, I think, 14, 17 different languages for you. This is really one of the most comprehensive and thoughtful websites out there to support the instruction of English learners. So this is not from the state of Colorado. Colorín, Colorado is the Spanish equivalent of they lived happily ever after. It's what's often written at the end of a storybook. You can get lost in here. It's so great. So we're taking you to a very specific place within Colorín, Colorado.
Absolutely. And what I really like is their search function here is really extensive. So as a practitioner, as a teacher, even as a parent, they're really good at helping you get to multiple things. And I know that sounds maybe silly, but the ability to navigate this really extensive website, I think is very easy. And so it's really helpful in that way. Let's talk about WIDA Essential Action, the Actions Handbook, which comes as a very lengthy PDF, but there's some really valuable things in here, particularly around strategies, and they group them around the levels and the domains. So Claire, any standouts here other than we just recommend that you print it, file it away, not file it away, print it, put it on your desk and read it.
Yeah, and it is
repertoire is what I meant.
Yeah, it's really worth a school leader sort of glancing at. And then again, this is a great resource that you can use within a PLC to print out just a couple pages and say, okay, you as teachers decide, what are we going to start with? They really hit a lot of important techniques that teachers should be using to help English learners. So,
absolutely. I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint. So we talked about where to get some of these resources, and then Claire, we want to bridge here to what does this actually look like? Claire, can you walk us through what a vocabulary focus looks like?
Sure. So, we printed, we color-coded, we unpacked that report. We created our own working document, very simple, right? In which we're starting to sort of place where our students are within those proficiency levels. And when we started to do that, to sort, some patterns emerged, right? And one of the things that we discovered is that our students were really struggling in the reading domain. And one of our teachers chimes in, you know what? I really think part of the problem here is that their vocabulary is not strong enough. And what we're seeing is that they're getting hung up in comprehension because they don't really know all the words that they're encountering in the text. So that began a discussion, a very rich discussion about maybe we should really focus on vocabulary building in each of our classrooms. And that's what this team of teachers decided to do. So what they discovered is that there's a great 2-minute tip on our website that focuses on a strategy called taking vocabulary field trips by using something as simple as Google Slides. So all the teachers watched this 2-minute tip. They all said, we can do this. We're going to try it. We're going to begin every day. We're going to take a very quick vocabulary field trip that's very rich in imagery. We're going to play with these words. And we're going to do it every single day in all of our classrooms. The principal came around looking for this. The teachers started to exchange ideas about what wasn't working. One teacher had an issue. She was spending way too much time on it. Another teacher gave her a suggestion. No, you really need to be focused in a quick pass every day. And they realized that they had begun to really integrate systematically. This is who we are now, right? That we are always teaching vocabulary in our classrooms, not just the words bolded in the glossary, but the everyday types of words that we encounter, those tier 2 words that we encounter, and all these different types of texts that our students encounter in our classrooms during the day. And once they felt like they had internalized that and they started to see the difference, then let's take on a new strategy or technique. So this is ultimately what this kind of engagement with WIDA can look like when it becomes impactful at the classroom level. And our students ultimately are starting to see different types of instruction happen in the classroom. So again, all this sort of framework that we created, it's not rocket science, but it was created because a real school came to us and said, we need help. We have this data, but it's not really translating into any kind of change. Help us think through how we can do it simply. So that's what we're sharing with you today. It's a real problem. It's probably going to sound familiar to a lot of you. And we hope this path is a way to kind of take it from that filing cabinet into the class.
100%. And I think, Claire, what we just walked through today is the idea of what I call the board game battleship approach, where we have narrowed to vocabulary that was a very specific proficiency level, maybe even specific domain, right? And so that's one way to get there, is to take this data and really narrow to a quadrant. And that is something that can be done in the first month. By the end of the semester, you can hit several of these pegs, but we want you to dream big. We want you to keep this momentum high and to think about, where are you going? Backwards design, something we tell all of our teachers to do. Again, this is a process. This will not happen overnight to get all of your English learners grade level proficient in all 4 domains, right? We looked at that chart. It takes many years, but that is our goal. So just a simple planning chart, but to think backwards about, where do we want to be in 5 years? I want, our children to be at a certain level. I want all of my teachers to understand this set of strategies. I want you to think through that. Then backing up, where are we starting? So potentially in the first month, we're focusing on speaking and oral communication. We're going to try these 4 new strategies. For example, by the end of the semester, we will have talked about 2 domains in year 1, year 2, and year 5. So just honestly, we say this of good teaching. We have to plan with these expectations, and we have to hold ourselves accountable and to make progress along the way. And we wish you the very best of luck in doing that. And so here's the things we'd love to encourage you to do. What does the data tell you? How do you unpack your report? How do you make this really salient at the PLC level? How do you identify priorities? And then how do you make sure there's change happening at the classroom level? One more time, how do you move that filing cabinet data in the cloud to the hands of teachers and ultimately to impact the day-to-day lives of children? So we just want to conclude with these 3 questions. Currently, where and how is WIDA data stored, and where do you hope for it to be in the next month? Currently, who combs the data and who is responsible for tracking progress? And hopefully, how do we move that to the teacher level as well?
Right, everybody.
Everybody.
We want the answer to be everybody.
100%. And then what are the goals of the WIDA assessment? So how do we move it from a simple identification process all the way down to daily academic language achievement for your English learners? And with that, we just simply want to say thank you. Thank you for your patience with us as we encounter the technical difficulties that you do as well in your schools. We're all in this together, and we are always here to support you. Please reach out. Thank you very much. Bye, friends.
Bye-bye. Make sure you hit stop.